Good afternoon, this is Sean Golding with Golding & Golding, here to discuss a little bit about the potential pitfall of the 3-year gift pullback rule if you're expatriate. It's a little complicated, it's a bit of a gray area, but let's jump into it. So expatriation tax, right? When certain U.S. citizens and long-term lawful permanent residents formally expatriate from the United States, and they meet any one of the 3 covered expatriate tests, they can be considered covered. Unless, of course, they meet one of the exceptions, the minors exception, dual citizen exception, but they're limited in their application and scope. So for the most part, most taxpayers, if they're a U.S. citizen or they're a long-term lawful permanent resident and they meet one of the 3 tests to be covered, they will be covered, exception won't apply. So for taxpayers who are only covered expatriates because they meet the net worth test, one thought, of course, is to try to reduce the net worth before they expatriate. Typically, there are strategies to do this, but you have to be careful. Okay, and again, this assumes the only reason you're a covered expatriate is because you meet the net worth test. You know, if you bring your net worth down, making gifts you may not want to make, but it turns out that you're still covered because you meet one of the other tests, then the strategy may not be good. In other words, some people think you have to meet all 3 tests. You just have to meet one. So if you're gifting to a U.S. spouse, citizen, that's typically going to be no problem at all. Marital deduction, you can basically gift any amount. You don't have to fill out the same forms you have to fill out for other types of gifts. Not the same for non-resident alien spouses and lawful permanent resident spouses. For lawful permanent residents, you still have your exclusion amount up to $13 million, right? But there's different planning techniques you may have to use. For a non-resident alien spouse, it's different. You can use the exclusion, which you can use the exclusion as well for a U.S. person spouse, 17, 18, 19, 20,000, depending on the year and the adjusting for inflation. But it doesn't work the same for non-resident alien spouses, NRAs. You could typically gift up to around about 200,000 using the exclusion. Then you may have gift tax implications after that. So one other consideration some taxpayers may do if they're a green card holder, they're living overseas, they may try to claim that their domicile is overseas instead of being in the United States. Domicile gifting rules are different than the income tax rules. It's a bit of a red flag area, especially if you're going to have to file an 8833 and you're already considered long-term. So that's something to consider. So common issues to consider. There's the 3-year pullback rule. Okay. It used to be a lot more overbearing. These days it's not as much. But the main concern is the expatriate has to be cautious in terms of if they're maintaining any control or strings over the gifts. In other words, if you're going to gift to your spouse, well, not to your spouse, if you're going to gift to a third party or your children, you have to actually give the gift. You can't hold the strings to the gift so you didn't really give it, or if you did give it, you still maintain some dominion, control, power over it. So you have to be careful with that. The second is the same year exception, which is if you're expatriating in the same year that you're giving the gift, it typically will not apply. Why? Because you are not going to be a U.S. person on the last day of the year, and thus that rule means that you don't have the same power to give the gift as you would if you were a U.S. person to avoid tax. Finally, as I mentioned before, if you're going to use domicile as any sort of mechanism to try to say you're not domiciled in the U.S., just be aware that there's the 8833 election trigger, which means if you're already a long-term resident and then you file an 8833 to be treated as a non-resident alien for tax purposes, and even for other purposes as well, then that's considered the Expatriating Act, not following the I-407, which you would do later. If the main reason you're a covered expatriate is because you're out of compliance, you can't show 5 years tax compliance. There's various programs you can use to get into compliance. We have a ton of free information available on our main website and our sub websites. You can always reach out and schedule a reduced fee initial consultation if it's appropriate to your matter, and it's something that we handle here. Again, my name is Sean Golding with Golding & Golding. Thank you for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day.